You're now live.
We are now live, so I'll call the meeting to order. Senate Finance, April 22nd. And today we're going to start with H 431. This is an act relating to the miscellaneous energy subjects. And we have some witnesses, and it's also our intention to add is it 125 taxation? Is that the number? On this bill. And I think that's what Karen Horn wants to speak to us about, is the property tax valuation. So going to start out with Josh Kaskengay from Power, Green Mountain Power. I knew you'd been here before. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you again. And again, for the record, I'm Josh Kaskengay, Vice President and Chief Innovation Officer at GMP, Green Mountain Power. So I think I'm going to attempt to share my screen. I don't know if to be a co-host or anything here. Let's see. PowerPoint. Okay, is that working?
Yeah, we can see it.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you. And thank you, committee. Good to see you all again. I'm just going to give a quick overview of what GMP and what Vermont has going on for battery storage here, and how successful Vermont has been from a storage deployment standpoint, and just general comments on the bill. So I figured just real quick in terms of this peak shaving 101, I'm sure folks have heard about how we can use batteries to save customers money as well as reduce overall carbon of the energy system. So basically, when we deploy batteries on the system, we can call on those batteries if they're able to be controlled or in one of our programs. And when the peak demand time comes during the day, so for example, a hot summer afternoon, everybody's cranking air conditioners, that's when the highest costs and the highest carbon on the system is taking place. So we're actually able to use those batteries, discharge them during those peak times, and reduce that total energy consumption during that peak window. So that's one of the biggest ways that we're using the batteries to save money for customers. And we're also able to make the batteries cheaper or provide incentives for the batteries, taking a share of that total savings. In addition, the customers have the batteries to ride through outages during, emergency time, during a grid outage, a storm, or what have you. We work with the customers. We're watching storms and weather all the time, just from a grid planning perspective. So if we see a major event coming, we're not using the batteries for other reasons. And then the last thing I'll say, it's actually really freshly new, is we are now using this fleet of distributed batteries in a market in ISO New England. It's called the frequency regulation market, but basically it's a way to take all of these systems, aggregate them together, and provide ISO New England with a resource that they can call on very quickly. Every 4 seconds, they're sending us a signal that we can use to either charge or discharge those batteries. And again, customers are compensated for that. So that's another revenue source coming into Vermont and helping to reduce the cost for our customers. So we have a couple programs right now from a residential battery standpoint. We have a bring your own device that I'll talk about program, and the energy storage system program. Both of these came out of really successful pilots that we ran a few years back when we first started getting into the residential battery storage space. And starting with the GMP energy storage system program, you can see the cost of the program here. The customers get the battery, 2 Powerwall batteries installed in their home. There's a number of installers in Vermont that can install these systems, and in exchange for allowing us to control those batteries during the peak times that I just mentioned, they pay a lot less than what the system would normally cost overall. So, and I should add, a lot of these are paired with solar, and you can store the solar during the day and discharge them during the peak times, or they don't have to be. So homes that can't do solar for one reason or another can still do a battery storage system and still get the same benefits from a peak dispatching capability. So for GMP territory, we're over 3,200 batteries, which is about 16 megawatts or 16,000 kilowatts. To put that in perspective, an average home when it's using the peak is maybe between 2 and 3 kilowatts. So we have 16,000 kilowatts of battery storage deployed, all with just individual 5 kilowatt batteries. So it's a pretty amazing aggregation, and as we'll show later, puts us in the lead in the country, in the top few states from a residential program per capita of the amount of storage deployed, and we're continuing to deploy more continuously. Let's go. So just, as we talked about, these are a few of the previous clips around how much the batteries had saved as we were rolling through the programs and the pilots. We were able to use these to reduce those peak demand costs. As mentioned, we have peaks that occur every month, and we also have what we call the annual peak, which is the New England, ISO New England peak. And those are the things we're always trying to go after, always trying to reduce those, because that's going to ultimately save costs, save carbon, and help us manage the system much better. One of the main benefit on the customer side is really around the outage resiliency. So this is just a snapshot. We had a major event, I believe it was a heavy wet snowstorm in late November of 2018. And this is just a snapshot of the battery system. Starting on the left, you have that blue line, and that's showing you the battery system fully charged, ready to go. And then the outage happens and the batteries start to discharge. And that slanted line is the battery essentially feeding the home and carrying. And then as you get down past November 29th here, you see a little bump, and then it continues where they had some solar. It was probably somewhat covered with snow at the time, but there was still enough to give a little bit of bump of battery charging, and then continue to run through for about 4 days. During the spring, summer, fall, you could almost do this continuously with the solar, recharging the systems and keeping it going. So they've been working really well from a emergency backup standpoint for customers. This is to talk a little bit more about the bring your own device program. So there's two options. We mentioned the one where you can essentially lease the system, pay a flat monthly price or one-time upfront price, or you can buy your own system. And we have a few different batteries that we're integrated with here. And we just give you an upfront incentive based on how much of that battery you want to share with us. So if you get a 10 kilowatt battery system, but you only want to share half of it, you can do that in this program. You can decide how much you want to share, and in exchange for that, we give you this incentive. Last we checked, it's still the highest incentive for this type of battery system in the country. And we also include a little bit more if the storage is sited in areas that are red on our solar map, which just basically means have a considerable amount of solar on the distribution system, because you can actually leverage these batteries as another resource to soak up the solar during the day and then let it flow out later after the sun goes down during the peak times. Just to put in perspective, GMP's peak has been bouncing around a little bit, but for the most part, it's like February at 8 p.m. It's winter peak in the evening after the solar has done its job during the day, and now we're seeing a peak later in the evening. In addition to the residential stuff, we have a lot going on in the commercial side. Folks, the committee may be aware that the State House is the first country that's now backed up with batteries instead of a fossil-fired generator, and that was a good idea from actually some legislators early on when they were talking about having to replace an older generator in the basement of the State House. We worked with some Vermont companies, Northern Reliability and Dynapower, and with the state of Vermont and Buildings and Grounds, and integrated that into our commercial BYOD system. And that system was in place and performed actually a few weeks back when there was a major storm rolling through Vermont. And again, similar to the residential program, we're able to tap into those batteries and use them during the same peak times, and then share a chunk of that value back to the customer, in this case, the state. One of the other programs that we ran through too was just using the battery storage system also to meter the energy consumption in the home. But one of the things we're always thinking about is if we can streamline equipment? Do we still need a traditional meter? Are there different ways to do it? If we're putting battery storage systems in homes, they all come with metering. It's a inherent part of the system and for the control. So can we actually leverage that metering and no longer need a traditional meter on the house? That's something that we're continuing to test. It's been pretty successful. About 80% of the systems are meeting our requirements for metering. And then we're figuring out on the other 20 what's going on and how we get that up to be a much higher percentage there. But that's another approach, another benefit of using these systems potentially in the home. On the larger scale stuff, we've got a few battery systems that are on the distribution grid itself. So a little bit larger systems. Our Panton battery system, there's a 5 megawatt solar array and a 1 megawatt, 4 megawatt hour battery system at the site. This one, in addition to doing all the things I mentioned, where we can use it for peaking, we can use it for that regulation service at ISO New England. We are in the process actually right now of building the first microgrid where we're just going to use the batteries and the solar and island a large portion of the distribution system itself. This hasn't been done yet because the system protection that keeps it reliable and stable all has to still function, obviously, when you're running in an island mode. And when you're doing it with just solar and storage, you need to engineer new solutions around how you make sure the system is protected. And we did that with a few partners over the last year and a half or so. And we are planning on being live with this microgrid system, the first of its kind this summer in Panton. And we've been working closely with the town. And our goal is once we get this tested out and work, we'd like to expand that island. We'd also like to expand this idea to the other systems we have, which we talk a little bit about here. These are just a number of projects that are either online or getting finalized, either PPAs where there's developers building the storage project and they're selling a service to GMP that we are utilizing for peak and other values. And a few systems that we've built over the years of our own that we're leveraging for all those same value streams. And as I mentioned with Panton, the goal is to expand that microgrid capability to a lot of these sites and a lot of these systems. It's the benefit of adding the battery with solar by itself. If the grid goes down, the solar goes down with it. As soon as you add a battery to that, you can use that whole system like an emergency generator and island if the bigger system has an issue during a major weather event.
What does island mean?
So basically, if the system feeding the town goes down, if a transmission line fails due to a tree contact or something, you can run that area, the island, just from this solar and storage facility, disconnected from the rest of the grid.
So it's a discrete, smaller distribution thing.
Yeah, basically, that's right. You've got if you think about it, normally when everything's connected, you've got transmission lines feeding down to substations, which then feed down to the distribution system, and that feeds customers at the end of it. If something happens in between, the substation has an issue, the transmission line has an issue, you're out. You have an outage on the circuit. So now we can be in these pockets on the distribution system and keep it running. And
you're now using pocket as a synonym for island?
Yeah, that's another term. I still like island better, but it's a small portion of the distribution system. The thing is, when we think about sizing the island, the bigger you make it, the more that could happen. So you need to kind of balance that.
Thank you. I was lost on the vocabulary. Thank you.
Very helpful. No problem. This is a snapshot from a recent energy storage report Wood Mackenzie put together. So this includes very, very large battery storage systems. You can see Vermont is in the greater than 10 megawatt. All the green is either nothing currently or less than 10, and the gray don't really have anything. And then the light blue have some bigger systems, which again, California, Texas, New York, and Pennsylvania have some very, very large individual systems. When it comes to actually residential systems and the amount of deployment, even if you take away the per capita, just look at Vermont, we're in the top 5 in the country in terms of how much deployment has happened in the smaller residential systems. So Vermont's actually been a really strong leader there, and continues to be. But there's a lot more going on. We've taken the programs that we've developed in Vermont with all of our partners here, and have talked to utilities all over the country just to help them think through it and hopefully develop more like it. To continue to get storage deployed. And that is the extent of the presentation. I think the last thing I'll say specifically on H431 is that we continue to be supportive of the language with the department's recommendations that I believe Ms. Margolis had put forward recently. And we're also on the I'm not a tax expert at all, but we're supportive of bringing some uniformity to how these systems are taxed as well. So that's, we've been supportive there also, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions at this point? Maybe if we can take down the share screen.
Yep, I will do that right now.
Okay, then I can see the committee.
If I can figure it out. There we go.
All right, Senator Hardy has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Josh, for your testimony. That was interesting. If you don't have to get in too many weeds about this, but I'm curious how it works if somebody has one of these batteries in their home, and part of the agreement to get the sort of discount, for lack of a better word, is that Green Mountain Power would be able to use it during peak times. How do you distinguish between when the customer has to use it because there's a power outage versus a peak time? I mean, who gets priority? I would assume the customer, but how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a few aspects there. If there is a like an pending weather event, anything that's because as mentioned, like we're constantly working with a number of meteorologists as well as internal folks on the weather and what's coming, so we can plan the system, plan the resources. When that shows up, we are essentially like calling off we call it dispatching of the batteries, but basically use of the batteries, so they stay full for the customer. In the rare event, but it can happen that there's a dispatch going on. We often during the peaks, and I should add that the dispatching is all automated, so there is not for the Powerwall program. It's always looking at the state load in real time and dispatching the battery. And often you don't need to use the whole battery. And when there is not a major weather event going on, and if an outage occurs, a squirrel gets on a transformer or something, our response time, what's that?
And we had the State House power go down because of a fried squirrel.
Those little buggers can get just about anywhere. It's unreal. Our ability to respond to those outages is much quicker than when it's a major event. So the duration that you need in the battery is less because we're there a lot more quickly. So the battery could be discharging. It's a pretty low probability, but it can happen that an outage occurs while the battery is discharging. The battery will still kick into backup mode even in that case and continue to carry your home as long as it can. And then the crews will arrive and restore everything.
So for example, in a really hot summer day where everybody's running their air conditioner, I would assume that would be a peak load time, and you would want to be using, Green Mountain Power would want to be using those batteries. But then a thunderstorm rolls in and it's bad and a lot of trees go down and people lose power. Will they still have enough juice in their batteries to carry their personal residential load after you've been using it during the peak time?
So in most of those cases, we're able, although we can't predict where the lightning is going to hit, we know that those kinds of events are coming. So summer pop-up thunderstorms are a really good example because the heat drives the peak and drives those things typically. So we can call off certain parts of the state too. If we know it's hitting the northern half of Vermont, we can dispatch somewhere else, leave those alone completely. So we're always trying to manage that constantly as we get through, especially the thunderstorm season. And if you're using the battery during a peak event, again, we're usually not using We don't always have to use the full amount of the battery. So with 2 batteries in the home, you can still have a pretty good amount of ride through. And but we're always the weather is definitely the key piece around, are we using the batteries or are we not?
Sounds pretty cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Josh, I'll just go ahead if that's all right.
Questions? All right,
Um,
Senator Pearson.
Josh, this does sound pretty cool. But I'm wondering, more than people investing in the power walls, we're actually likely to see an explosion of people having electric cars, which offer really the same opportunity, as I understand it, just a more elaborate storage system in the sense. How far off are we from that, where you would, instead of dispatching the battery on my basement wall, would dispatch the battery from my car that I've given you permission to in some way overnight?
Yeah, so there's probably 2 aspects. There's like a philosophical piece of it and the technical piece of it. Technically, it's there today. We have a system actually that we've been testing with a Nissan Leaf in a parking lot, GMP. That's a vehicle to grid, or basically we can pull from the battery in the car. What we're doing right now on the residential side of things with customers is controlling the charging. So we're not pulling from the car, but during those peak events, we can actually ramp down the charging. So, which is still a typical level 2 charger in a home for a car uses 6 kilowatts, which is still a pretty substantial amount. And when an average home might peak at like 2 or 3 normally. So, just having that capability to ramp that down produces a lot of value. To me, the vehicle to grid thing, we're looking at heavily with the transportation, the fleet transportation side. So school buses, larger vehicles for sure. School buses are super exciting because they run a route in the morning. They can charge in the middle of the day, soak up solar that we really, we need to do. And then they run a route in the afternoon, and anything left we can use during that peak. On the residential side, the V2G, the vehicle to grid chargers, are still pretty expensive. They haven't quite gotten to that threshold where they're probably cost effective in the home. And then in addition to that, you need something else that's going to isolate your home from the grid. If there's an outage, there's more equipment that you may need at that point in time. So I think we want to see the cars get more mileage in them, more electric miles in them, more battery storage, those chargers to come down. But in the meantime, we'll continue to run the programs that we do for the charging and looking heavily at V2G on the larger fleet side of things.
Okay, any other questions for Josh? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to Karen Horn. And Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for getting me in this afternoon. We are concerned about one proposed addition to H431 that would prohibit altering the amount of tax assessed on underlying real property or underlying property tax classifications. It's been a pretty fascinating year this session with respect to requests for property tax exemptions. We've agreed to language in H360, section 16, that exempts new poles and wires used to extend broadband service to underserved areas if it's being done in conjunction with the CUD, because of the larger benefit that that's going to provide to get broadband to the last mile. We agree in the context of this bill that it makes sense to apply the same statutory property tax rates to energy storage facilities that are today applied to renewable energy plants for solar power. So that is an annual tax of $4 per kilowatt plant capacity in the statute in Title 32. And we understood that to be the initial request from Renewable Energy Vermont. I will apologize if I didn't understand the whole proposal until just recently. I think it's worth pointing out that current law at section at Title 32, Section 8701, which is uniform capacity tax, says that it has definitions section, and it says, provided, however, that any tax exempt or exemption under this chapter shall only apply to the fixtures and personal property of a plant and not to the underlying land. Any provision to exempt facilities or property from the property tax shifts the burden for paying property taxes to the remaining property taxpayers. Your committee knows this very well. There's a lot of land under solar panels in Vermont. And Vermont's property taxpayers are already overburdened. I think your committee is also very well aware that everybody would love to be exempt from property taxation. You get a lot of requests around that. Property values are also increasing significantly right now, and land values increase in general. The property owner who would derive the benefit if the land sold understands that reality and understands the nature of the increasing value and potentially increasing property taxes. We really don't understand why an appreciating asset such as land under solar facilities would merit a property tax exemption. And we are opposing the proposal to exempt land under solar facilities from property taxes, or to not be allowed to alter the value of those lands, because it will shift the burden to other property taxpayers. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Pearson, I'm going to take you first, and then Senator Hardy and Senator McDonald.
Yeah, thanks. And I don't have a question, but I imagine there's a lot of confusion. And I've just learned a little bit about it this week. So senators will remember that we've talked about the idea of adding language to this bill from S-128 that
128, all right.
treats storage the way we treat solar. As we've dug into that, we've found out that there's at least a misunderstanding between intent and where we land, I think, on the way we tax solar. And that is at a capacity. I would take a small exception with what Karen said. Nobody's talking about a tax exemption for land under solar. It's been discussed of whether or not there would be a leveling, basically, of the land value, as opposed to the town saying, oh, you've now got a lucrative solar array, we're going to crank up the value, as somebody said, like a hotel. That's confusing. I'm already confused. The problem is that needs to be sorted out independently. I don't suggest we do it today or this year. When we go to say to the battery should be treated out the same way, the question is, should we truly do it the same way, or should we at least try to address this problem in the storage as we look to the solar another day? And one suggestion and a question for you, Karen, is if we made it clear just in the storage that there was a smaller capacity tax available for the municipality while keeping the land value consistent, I'd be glad to share that language with you. But does that, at least just in the storage side, is that something you're familiar with or would look at or consider?
I think that would also be concerning to us. One other approach that the committee may want to take is, so I understand that lands are valued differently in different towns because they're actually worth more in different towns, worth different amounts in different towns. But the property valuation, I've not suggested this to property valuation yet, so I don't know what their reaction might be. But property valuation has in the past looked at assessing properties that are difficult to assess, so that you only end up assessing occasionally, right, for their value. And so it might be a plausible alternative to ask Property Valuation Review to put together how you're going to assess the land under solar or energy storage facilities.
Okay.
As it,
What you're saying is we don't tax exempt it, but
It
don't-
looks,
we don't
looks like-
want it to be, there are some town assessors who will say, you've now got this valuable asset on it, and therefore the land value triples. But you're saying even if it started out, as most of them seem to start out as open field, that the value of open field, potential house lots, is increasing, and you would like the ability of the towns to have that land value rise as similar values rise in the town.
right, the basis of our land assessment system is fair market value. And we think that fair market value in particular should apply to land. And if it's under solar facilities, the argument was made fairly strongly a few years ago that you can always return it to other uses. So it seems to us that this is not a place where we're making such an adjustment is reasonable from our perspective.
Okay, so you would like the price to be able to rise or fall with similar plots of land. The idea with having it taxed at its original value is that those solar arrays, can be taken down, and then you've got a big open field, or you've got 5 house lots or whatever. You've got what you had, but in the 20 years, that land value has probably increased. And you would like, to be able to have the land under the solar array increase at similar rates.
Yes, that is our request.
Okay. I had Senator Hardy and then Senator McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Some of my questions were answered because I was really confused as to what amendment or proposal we were talking about, or whether it was something in the bill already. So we're talking about H431, but we're not talking about language that's already in that bill. We're talking about a proposal to add language that's in, what is it, Senator Pearson, S128 to this bill. So that's what you were speaking on, Karen?
Yeah, so
Okay.
you have testimony from Renewable Energy Vermont, Olivia Kimball, on your website. And she has a couple of recommendations for changes to the statute. And the change that we're concerned about is 32 VSA 8701 uniform capacity tax. And then you go all the way down to D, and there's a new sub 2 under that. And that's the piece that we are concerned about.
Okay, so your testimony is in reaction to Olivia's testimony, basically, in some ways. And
Yeah, but if I could just be
yeah,
clear.
go ahead. Go ahead.
We're okay with the idea of applying the same kind of taxation amount that's now applied to solar panels, also to energy storage facilities. That makes sense to us. It's the land under that additional provision that we're not particularly happy about.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that clarification. And one of the reasons I'm confused is because I unfortunately missed Olivia's testimony because I had a small family issue I had to deal with. But so this clears it up. Thank you.
Senator McDonald.
Madam Chair, is the reporter of the bill that established the law that we are discussing. My understanding of the law is that there's 100 acres of solar panels. The solar panels would be taxed on the production of the electricity, and the land beneath the solar panels would be taxed at the going rate for 100 acres of undeveloped land. And those two taxes would be what was available to the municipality. When we're talking about storage batteries, we're probably talking about on 100 acres, you might take half an acre, a quarter acre, or whatever.
That's minor.
Yeah, it's minor, and if it was part of the same parcel, it would be the value of the 100-acre plot. Now, if 100-acre plots in a given town or neighboring towns or in the region change in value and go up as property values do, then the definition of that 100 acres and what it's taxed at is at the same rate as 100-acre parcels in that town or area. And I believe that to be the case in current law. And if that is true and we get some verification that I've explained this correctly, then we perhaps know what the problem is that we're encountering or trying to solve.
I think the problem is that there was a suggestion that be changed. That was my understanding of what happened.
So I believe we have also heard, I've got a grapevine or in testimony, that some towns have gone ahead and reappraised the so-called 100-acre parcels of solar panels and not treated them like other 100-acre parcels, and that the Renewable Energy Vermont is concerned that that's taking place, and we might double check to see whether or not that's happening.
We could, or there is an appeals process if the landowner feels that they're being.
Perhaps, well, then we might want to double check that. And then lastly, it was suggested by someone recently that this only applied to the school taxes, and the municipal taxes were somehow not under this umbrella that I've tried to describe. And we ought to have someone tell us whether the law includes the appraisals similarly for both those.
I assume that's Abby. And the question is, are towns overappraising? Are there appeals? And are there appeals? And
So I would rephrase that, Madam Chair, to say in land underneath solar panels, are
Yes.
towns appraising that land
yes, that's what
similar
we're
to
talking.
other land that has no solar panels under it, but it is otherwise similar?
I will, we'll get that to Abby and we'll ask Property Valuation and Review to come talk to us. Senator Pearson.
I've been working with Abby and the tax department to get clear on how to do just the original goal of the storage question. And in those discussions, we've kind of unearthed this challenge. So just so you know, we're trying to pull the parties together. Karen, is it accurate? I believe Senator McDonald's description is accurate. But that, and out of the gate, that's how towns did it. But more recently, is it fair to say that's changed more recently, and towns are saying I'll phrase it this way. The legislature's not the legislation is not airtight, and we do have the right to change the value of the underlying land, and that is happening. And I guess my question is there a time change that's happened here? It was going along, I think, as Senator McDonald described, and now it's been changed in some towns. Is that fair?
My understanding is that the way Senator McDonald described it is what happens. The towns do undertake reappraisals. Some towns do it on a rolling basis. Some towns do it all at once. But I've not heard of towns that in particular pick out a field that's under solar panels and decide to reappraise that independently of other properties. I would mention that I believe the tax department does some auditing of listing practices and appraising and assessing practices every now and then at the local level. And Jill Remick may be able to speak to that also. I don't recall if it's the entire or if it's just directed toward current use properties, but there is some audit function that the department performs now.
Okay, we'll follow up on that.
That's kind of germane to our decision-making, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So any other questions for Karen? Karen, anything else you want to tell us?
No, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go on to Tom Murray. I don't know how long this has been a new job, but last time I saw you in the witness seat, this isn't who you were representing.
I've been with Vermont Gas for, I think, 6 years now. So, but
Wow, well, I guess it's been a
been a
while
few
since you've been
years.
in. I
Yeah.
remember you with telephones.
yeah, many years there. So thank you, and thank the committee for the time today. And I appreciate being able to come in on relatively short notice. For the record, I'm Tom Murray. I'm the Vice President of Decarbonization Technology at Vermont Gas. And my testimony today is about H431 and one slight correction to include some of the storage projects that we're working on. So I've got a relatively quick presentation. I'm trying to be very respectful of the committee's time here. So if you'll bear with me, I've got a few slides I'm going to go through, and then we can have a little discussion about the concept. But so
Okay.
let me see if my sharing will work properly here. Can you share? Let me know if you can see this presentation, folks.
Yes, that's up.
So the concept here is about hydrogen and what's often referred to as power to gas, basically blending, taking renewable electricity, converting it to hydrogen through a process of electrolysis. And that hydrogen gas can be put into our pipes. It can be stored. It can be used to displace fossil fuels, but it can also be used to generate electricity with a hydrogen fuel cell and things like that. So this concept is taking off kind of across the globe as a way to really address all these renewables that are coming online to meet our climate goals. What do you do with all that when there's excess renewables and things like that? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and how 431 could help us to bring hydrogen projects into the state. Quick little blurb, Vermont Gas is committed to addressing climate change. We've got a net zero by 2050 goal, and we're trying to get to a 30% reduction. We've been selling renewable gas for several years from digesters. We're working on a big farm project that's coming online. So we're committed to climate, and hydrogen is one of those tools. As I mentioned, this concept, I went over this briefly, but this is the concept of being able to it's called green hydrogen because you're using it renewable energy, and it can be blended in our pipes. It can be used to generate electricity in a storage. The neat thing about it is you could create the hydrogen today, store it in our pipes, and dispatch it at any time in the future conceptually. So it allows long-term storage. This concept in Europe in particular has taken off. Many countries like Germany and France and some of the Scandinavian companies are working to convert their gas systems to hydrogen systems over the coming years. So there's a nice match there. And then in the U.S., it's, as often, we're a little bit slower than Europe on this stuff, but we're seeing a lot of activity up in Canada. For example, there's a big project with Hydro-Quebec converting hydroelectricity to hydrogen up in Canada, and there's also a big project in Ontario. So we're really seeing this take off. This diagram is kind of a capture all diagram. It's renewable electricity, an electrolyzer, creating this green hydrogen. You can blend it in the gas grid. You could potentially run hydrogen fuel cells. You could run hydrogen vehicles. So having that as a resource in Vermont brings another tool to play for potentially powering vehicles. There is a resurgence in hydrogen powered vehicles in particular. You've noticed several of the manufacturers are seeing that as another way. Electric vehicles are going to be predominant, but you're also going to see some other vehicle options out there. So, and then you can also partner this with digesters and actually produce even more renewable gas by blending the CO2 and this renewable hydrogen together. So I recognize these are a lot of concepts, but the concept I want to get to you, that there's an opportunity here. We're working with several players to see if we can develop a hydrogen project in our footprint, working with solar developers, technology players, hydrogen companies, electric utilities, to see if we can put together one of these projects in Vermont to be a big storage facility that would help to bring on more renewables. The real opportunity here is if we can use this as a tool, we can bring on more renewables. You guys are familiar with the Shia issue up in northern Vermont. If we were to put one of these facilities up in the Shia region, which we've talked to Vermont Electric and Velco about quite a bit, we could basically help to resolve that bottleneck and allow more renewables to come on to the system and advance that whole initiative, which we all know is so critical to our climate goals. This slide here is a Siemens depiction of where hydrogen storage fits. So the stuff that Josh was talking about is kind of in the lithium ion battery and the kind of the smaller storage duration, which helps on the peak side, as Josh pointed out. But when you think about our winter period, where we have long periods where we don't have sun and things like that, and solar is not all that efficient in the winter months, if we can store electricity as hydrogen that's generated in the summer months in our pipes, and then dispatch it in the winter months, either for electricity or for offsetting fossil fuels, we're advancing our climate goals. And so to that end, we've got a proposed amendment that we'd like to put forth for H431 that I put up on the screen here. I hope you can see that. So we've talked to all the distribution utilities about that, recognizing that we are late to the party on this. We talked to the Department of Public Service on this. We've talked to the Public Utilities Commission. We've talked to REV on this, and nobody had an issue with it. And most of them were thinking that this was a good thing to add. We did not try to alter the original definition that's in blue. We thought it might be better just to put this as a supplemental sentence. That was the Department's of Public Services recommendation. And again, it's a relatively minor change, but we think that given the potential that we're seeing around the globe for hydrogen and the interest that we have in trying to get a project going, we're kind of like GMP in the sense that we think Vermont is a proving ground because we're small and we're nimble, and we can do some things that in the big bureaucratic states you just can't do very easily. So we think there's an opportunity here for us to be ahead of the pack. We're the first gas utility in the country to get renewable natural gas into our pipelines for retail sales a few years ago. So we're excited about hydrogen as kind of the next evolution, and potentially could be the future of our whole pipeline system, in that it could be a full hydrogen system by 2050. A lot of companies are thinking that may be the place we're headed. So with that, I'll leave you with this last slide and questions. So just one note, this project here that you see is pictured it's in Salisbury, very close to Senator Hardy's home. That project is just about ready to start up. So this facility is the project with Middlebury College and Vanguard Renewables. So those are digesters you see. The biogas that's in there is actually being converted to renewable gas. It's being cleaned up and it will be injected in our pipes in May. And that project, for example, if we were to put a hydrogen facility right next to that, we could increase the output of that by 30 to 40% with blending green hydrogen with that facility. So you can see the kind of potential of blending hydrogen storage as a tool in our efforts to address climate change. So with that, I'm going to unshare, if I can figure that one out. Maybe I can't. Go over here, stop sharing. All right, hopefully I was able to achieve that in.
But he's back.
Yeah.
Committee, this is interesting. And the proposal would be, that's a whole system. It's got a digester, but if you put a tank, and I assume one of those pictures was a tank. So far, we're only dealing with the land under the proposal. How is your storage tank taxed now?
Yeah, so two things. As we look to H431, the purpose of that bill is to organize and clarify some storage regulations. So ostensibly, and I'll certainly defer to the department on this, but H431 is to clarify how storage facilities are regulated, kind of small and large, and making sure that the smaller ones can be deployed expeditiously without too much regulatory burden. Hydrogen projects are going to be large, and we fully expect to have a full PUC process on that, and we welcome that process. We want them heavily involved. So we're not trying to avoid a regulatory process in that regard. So that's most of what's in H431 is definitional stuff around that. To some extent, it's a miscellaneous bill because it sets up some clarity. So that's what's in it. We want to make sure we're included in the definition of that. The tax issue that's been talked about in S128, we haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that one. All we would ask is that we were treated at the same at par. So to the extent that you were to set up a rubric that is proposed in S128 for taxation of storage facilities, you would think that you'd want a hydrogen facility included in that. If we had a hydrogen facility today, I suspect it's taxed just like any other property in the sense that it would have the town would get to assess the valuation, fair market value, and things like that. But beyond that, as Mr. Castagay said, I'm not a tax expert, so I'll defer on that one and just ask that if, when the time comes and you guys consider all the mechanics of that we be held at a same par to a lithium-ion battery or something like that.
Okay, so you basically, what you really want right now is to become part of the vernacular, to be recognized as a storage facility that is somewhat newer than, the power walls in the basement, but looking towards future expansion.
Yeah, exactly, Chair. So basically, what we're faced with now is we're talking about some projects and trying to advance these projects, and I know what's going to happen. If we conjure up a project with our partners and we're actually looking for grant money from DOE and things like that, if we march down to the PUC and we're left out of the storage definition, the PUC is going to be like, great, go over to the State House and get yourself added and we'll look at this petition. So now is the time to get us included. These are a little different in the sense that, like I said, they don't have all the same characteristics as a battery storage in the sense, but there are in the broad sense a storage project, but we welcome the PUC saying we're going to treat all the batteries in these because they're a little cookie cutter at some point on the battery side. Our project is going to be unique, and so we welcome the PUC looking at it in a broader sense. No, we're not asking for any streamlined process, if you will.
No, you just want to be included in the definition since we're defining. Okay, committee, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks, Tom. You're right, that project is it's like 5 minutes from my house. I'm just, again, trying to understand the science, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds with it, but hydrogen, if you're storing it, how stable is it? And how safe is the storage of it?
So the essence of it is it's stored in our pipeline. So when it gets blended in our pipelines, we're talking about like less than 5%. So it's blended in our pipelines. And so it's just as safe as it is a natural gas, if you will, in terms of, and so we're not going to have like a big storage tank. And if we did, it would be cryogenically stored hydrogen where it's basically cooled and it's fairly safe. There's a few facilities around the state that have some of these projects, and they're fairly safe. But we're not envisioning having a big hydrogen storage tank in some municipality or something like that. I think the whole premise is using our system as the vessel to store hydrogen.
Okay, so it's not like a big, huge storage tank of unstable gas that then you would use if you needed to.
No.
Okay.
No, the neat thing is there are technologies that you can extract the hydrogen at another place. For example, we could take solar in Highgate and convert it to hydrogen, and we could technically extract the hydrogen in Middlebury to run a fuel cell because of our pipeline system, basically. So that's the beauty of it. And so yes, it's a neat opportunity that's really starting to get traction, and we want to make sure we have a chance to take a look at it.
And how affordable is it? Is it expensive to do the extraction?
It is expensive, but that's like any new technology. We're expecting that to come down. You know, when you look at all these cost charts, they're expecting that by 2030, it is really in the wheelhouse. We think that with some grants and some help from, we can do a demonstration project that would get us on the map. But this is a concept that's going to need help from the electric utilities, the regulators, and other entities like many concepts. But we think it's when you think about the amount of storage we need to meet our electric heating loads, we've got to figure out something that's probably a little more robust than lithium-ion batteries because of the amount of heat energy we deliver in the winter months.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
We're gonna have to move on because we started out 15 minutes late. Senator McDonald.
So, Madam Chair, the
Yes.
the witnesses described something that's interesting, and we're, I think, excited about. The witness certainly is, and there are many aspects about what he's told us that mimic our tax treatment of solar, and I'm no doubt there will be many other aspects of this technology which are starkly different for tax purposes than solar. And we probably should look into the differences as well as the similarities before we we move ahead. But this is exciting, and I would caution us to look at both the similarities and the distances to best approach this new technology.
Okay. Thank you. Tom, do you have a final?
Just and our primary objective is to get amended into H431. The tax issue I recognize is a complicated issue, as all tax issues are, and you folks know that acutely. So I don't want to concede too early on that one, but I think getting in the H431 language would be a big step for us. The tax issues, because we're only going to have probably two or three of these projects in the state. I'm not as focused on that as the numerous amount of smaller battery storage is. And so if we're left out of that part of the bill, it wouldn't be a sin. And I hear what Senator McDonald is saying. So thank you, committee, for the time.
Thank you.
We realize your eagerness. Yep.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Other people, we're going to move along. This is S88 committee. Remember, this is the insurance housekeeping bill to which the House attached the separating the insurance markets, which are very time sensitive at this point. We got told this morning, no, we couldn't make changes to this year because the rates have been submitted. But they also attached a bill that we had last year, did not take action on after we got sent home, but it has to do with dentists and saying dental insurance companies cannot regulate the price charged for procedures that they do not insure. So if you insure fillings and extractions, but you don't do whitenings, and I don't think we call them caps anymore. But you cannot say, if you take our insurance, these are the prices you can charge our, our customers for those process. And I know we had some discussion, well, this might be good for consumers because they can get, but I'm thinking that this also sets a precedent. If one insurance company can regulate the price because they have a market share of services they do not insure, once we've set that legal precedent, I think it's possible we could find that they could regulate prices in the upward direction. It might not benefit consumers. So it's not just this issue. This is setting a precedent that says an insurance company can influence or require a price for a procedure they don't cover. So we cover knee replacements, but by the way, if you're going to let us do that, this is what you can charge for a hip replacement, which we don't cover. And I think that's what this is saying. So I've lost my agenda again. First is Michael Fisher. There you are. I knew you were there. Okay, Michael, you're on.
Thank you, Senator Cummings, and thank you, Senate Finance Committee. I think what I plan to do is speak for just a moment about the, I think, 3 sections of S88 that got added, healthcare-related sections that got added on the House proposal amendment individually, and then talk to you for a minute about my perspective of them as a package, because my perspective changes a little bit when I think of it as a package. And so just very briefly, section 32 that relates to credit card payments for providers. The Healthcare Advocates Office has no objection to that language. It seems reasonable.
And that was the mandating that you had to pay by credit card, right? Okay.
And then I'll skip to section 34, which is the separating the individual and small group market. That's language your committee knows well, you developed it, and the Healthcare Advocates Office is in strong support of it. And so that leaves with section 31, which is the dental insurance section. And I'll spend just a moment. I'm not a fan. I'll just say that. I'm not a fan of it. It, to me, looks like the typical fight that I see regularly in my position between insurers and providers. And often when payers and providers battle over details of their contracts, consumers get, whether you want to call them consumers or Vermonters or patients, from my perspective, get left out or often get harmed. And I also think it's important to recognize that this is in large part a battle about principles. Providers don't like insurers telling them what they can charge, generally, and in this case. And providers also are always looking for ways of reducing administrative burden. And so I think you hear that in this discussion. From the consumer's perspective, I generally am always looking for, well, actually any entity, but in this case, insurers, payers, stronger push to reduce payments for consumers. And I'll say it more personally, fair disclosure. I'm a Blue Cross member and a Delta Dental member. I know less about Delta Dental details, but I'm always, I would like my insurer to argue stronger on my behalf to reduce costs. So I am generally supportive of the insurer's ability to do that, whether it's directly for something that they cover or whether it's a benefit to me for something that they don't. I of course would rather have my insurer cover something, but I still think it's a potential benefit for the consumer, for the member to be able to get the benefit of a reduced rate because they're a member. So lastly, I want to push back on a concept that I've heard in this discussion about cost shift. I don't buy the basic arguments about cost shift. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to say there's no such thing as cost shift. Of course, public payers pay significantly less for many services, and that pushes costs to the private payer. But we often talk about cost shift as if it's a one-to-one. If you increase my reimbursement here by $1, I'll reduce your charges there by $1. And I just have to say, as an advocate who's watched this system for a long time, I don't buy it. I don't see it happening. And so in my experience, and I'm painting a broad brush, I'm not talking about dentists in particular here. In my experience, providers charge what they can get. And that's a very different frame than I have to charge you $1 more because someone else is paying me $1 less. And I fully appreciate that dentists and other providers are running businesses and they have to make it. If you had Section 31 in front of you as a standalone bill, I'd be asking you to oppose it. You don't have Section 31 in front of you as a standalone bill. You have it as a part of a package, as a part of a House proposal of amendment. And I generally feel more passionately and the importance of Section 34, it carries more weight for me at this moment, given the movement. The insurers have to file their rates in, if my calendar is right in my head, 2 weeks and 1 day. In all honesty, everyone in the insurance rate review process is behaving as if Section 34 will pass. The schedule for the hearings in insurance rate review are being laid out as if they are the individual and small group are separated. And it's my understanding that the insurers are behaving as if planning to file the rates with the individual and small group separated. But it is indeed just 2 weeks and 1 day away when we start this wonderful choreographed dance we call insurance rate review. And so given that and given the dynamic that's in front of us, I have to choose my battles. And I end up with a conclusion that while I'm not a fan of Section 31, it doesn't push me to want to advocate for you to take the time it would take to go back and forth with the House and attempt to make a change or strip it out. I will add, I think I forgot, but I do want to add that, as a part of the cost shift argument, we don't regulate how much providers charge. Providers can charge what they want, and if there was a mechanism to do that, to really make sure that we ironed out savings to the consumer, I'd be much more in favor of that. But there is no mechanism there's sort of the gesture of a mechanism of that in the in the hospital budget process. But even that's too high a level. And I think and for the rest of the provider community, there really is no regulatory tool to put a check on rates on behalf of consumers. Anyway, those are my comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Michael, I've never had dental insurance, so I don't know. But my understanding is that dental insurance isn't like medical insurance in that, you know, there's an 80-20 split and you've got this deductible. It's more, well, we'll pay $50 towards a filling and we'll cover up to 3 fillings a year, and we'll pay $75 towards this. If your provider charges more, if they charge $100 per filling, then that's your choice and you can shop around or you pay it. But it's not a percentage base generally. And I will say I voted for the NCOIL model bill on this one, and it was one provider who had 75% of the market and therefore could control the cost. I don't think we've got that in Vermont. But it's a mixed bag to me. But am I right about dental insurance in general?
I think you may have other witnesses that know more about it than I
Okay.
do, but my understanding of it is similar to yours. It is, if you will, paying ahead for
Yeah.
a set of services more than what we think of in the traditional fully insured model.
Okay. Any questions for Michael? Okay, you're going to go on to Jamie Feehan.
You know, excuse me, Jamie, if I could, I'm not sure I said it as clear as I wanted to say it. Maybe the members got the gist of it, but I do want to just say clearly, I think it's important to pass the insurance marketplace language as quickly as possible. And I apologize if I'm ending up saying it twice. I think it's important that if the committee can see its way towards, if there's not other sections of the bill that I wouldn't hold up the bill over this section, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, that's clear. Jamie.
Thanks, Senator Cummings. Jamie Feehan with Permer Piper, Eggleston and Kramer on behalf of the Vermont State Dental Society, which is the professional association of Vermont dentists and counts almost 300 practicing dentists as members, representing 85% of the practicing dentists in Vermont. Joining me is Dr. Steve Pittman, who is one of those practicing dentists, also has had leadership positions within the State Dental Society, including a stint as chair of their executive committee. I'm glad Dr. Pittman's able to join me because if you recall when we last discussed this last summer or so before the clock ran out, finding a dentist at the time was difficult, as were lots of things at that time. And so he's here as a resource to not only give his perspective, but also to answer your questions related to this issue. Senator Cummings, I'm certainly thankful of your time to squeeze us in, and I'm cognizant of that, but I think it's helpful to maybe restate the issues a little bit. I also have, importantly, some information on scope and economic impact that we've been able to receive since we last touched this, which I think will help put this issue in proper context. And obviously we can go down any road, but if that sounds appropriate, I'm happy to jump right in.
Sounds
Great.
fine.
So again, I'll speak to sections 31 and 32. 32, probably less so. That's the virtual credit card piece. And just very quickly, the Dental Society also supports that section. We brought the issue to the legislature only related to dentistry, but as you heard, the Department of Financial Regulation has heard from other healthcare providers that are also facing this issue with insurers, and have asked that it be broadened to include all those other providers, including dentists and ambulance service providers. And we're certainly supportive of DFR's suggestion to broaden it to others, and we're supportive of the language that came over from the House there. Section 31 is, of course, this issue of covered or non-covered dental services. Importantly, this issue does not revise in any way the scope or level of dental insurance benefits, copays, deductibles, et cetera. Only the contract between the dentist and the insurer providing the dental insurance. Also importantly, this bill only addresses private insurance and does not, for example, address or impact Medicaid or other public programs. What happens is that the dentist enters into an agreement with an insurer based upon an agreement of covered services that the insurer will pay for its members or subscribers. It's a contract between the insurer and the dentist with penalties or consequences for breach. The fees set pursuant to the contract may be discounted, but not always. As you've heard in the walkthrough and previous testimony, there have been efforts by insurers to dictate prices for services not covered by that insurer. In other words, the insurer will say, even though this isn't a procedure we're going to set the fee for that procedure and make it part of our contract with you. This is a substantial change in the longstanding relationship that dentists have had with dental insurers. The contract also has other implications. If a patient wishes to remain with a dentist and pay an agreed upon price, accepting that offer could put the dentist in breach of his or her provider agreement with the insurer. In addition, dentists lose the ability to offer payment plans or set rates below any arbitrary fee that the insurer may set, again, because it would put them in potential breach of their contract with the insurer. As you know, the vast majority of dental offices in Vermont have one, maybe two dentists. They don't have the ability to bargain effectively with a large insurer. Dentists are also precluded by law from banding together, by antitrust law from joining together to try to negotiate collectively. So that's why the Dental Society is here to you, the government, looking for help in sort of policing the market through statutory changes in public policy. Other impacts to the dentist, if they don't comply with the contract, they potentially may face exclusion from the dental insurer. And as you've heard, in Vermont, the dental insurance market is largely dominated by one insurer, Delta. So effectively, a dental office with one or two dentists doesn't have the ability to opt out of that agreement with Delta, given the size in the market. One thing I mentioned, I do have some information on the scope and impact. If you recall, one of the challenging aspects from the Dental Society in determining, what we're talking about is we would have to go from office to office, and each office may have a different contract with a dental insurer on some of its procedures, not only in the same region of the state, but other regions of the state. So it would be very challenging to be able to go to each office to be able to compile that information. Further, there is some concern by some offices in going public with their contract and detailing the provisions entailed in that contract. Thankfully, however, since we last convened to talk about this, and now we've had some good discussions with Delta, and we're very thankful for them in sharing with us information, I think due in large part to them getting ready to go live in New Hampshire, which passed a law last year, the year before, but is just going live in January. So we asked Delta for the impact in Vermont, both in terms of the amount of non-covered services and the types of procedures that are subject to this. And we appreciate them sharing that information. So if you'll bear with me, I've got some numbers that I can share with you. For the 2019 treatment period, overall, there were approximately 845,000 procedures submitted by Vermont providers to Northeast Delta Dental. Of those 845,000 procedures, only 27,000, which translates to 3%, would be considered non-covered. Of those 27,000 non-covered procedures, only about 7,500 were subject to artificial fees set by Delta. Those 7,500 procedures represent less than 1%, 0.89% actually, of the total procedures submitted. Again, the $845,000 number. The total amount of the artificial fees was approximately $470,000 in 2019 treatment period. Compare that to the total amount paid to professional services by Delta in 2019, which was $75.5 million, according to their most recent annual report. You might ask, like we did, what about the other 2/3 of non-covered services fees that aren't subject to an artificial fee? And Delta tells us that for those 2/3, the fee charged by the dentist is actually lower than the fee Delta would set, or it's a fee that Delta hasn't established or had in mind. We think that that is very significant in terms of how dentists react under the pricing of these non-covered services. We also asked which types of procedures are most utilized on the non-covered service. So we were provided with 7 codes in descending order of usage in Vermont. So the most of these 7 was nitrous oxide, which is perceived as an elective. The next was subgingival irrigation, which might be perceived as an additional service not needed. The third was placement of an antibiotic on the gum line, again, perceived as elective. The fourth was a specialist code for an oral surgeon for an IV injection. The fifth was a night guard, which again is perceived as cosmetic or elective. The sixth was a bone graft after an extraction, which might be seen as elective or unrelated to the extraction. And the last was a 2-surface tooth coloring for a back tooth, which I'm told is usually downgraded to a silver filling code. Collectively, these 7 codes made up about 65% of the non-covered services. And all the other non-covered procedure codes with artificial fees made up less than 2% of the overall non-covered submissions. So what S88 basically says is that insurers cannot engage in this practice. As Mr. Fisher alluded to, it is a principled argument that says it's inappropriate or wrong to dictate a price for a service that you don't cover. If you cover it, let's talk. That's part of the negotiating aspect. But if you don't cover it, we don't see why an insurer can submit a price and make it part of its contract. I'm also told, and Dr. Pittman will certainly speak to this, that there's an administrative burden that comes along with non-covered services. And if you take this and the virtual credit card as 2 examples, they are examples of sort of ever increasing challenges that dental offices have with dental insurers and administrative complexities that continue to surface. For Delta, given its size, it's probably not a potential scenario for a dental office to sort of opt out of the agreement or relationship that they may have with Delta. But for other smaller insurers or insurers that don't have as large a footprint in Vermont, that becomes a more real scenario. And we are concerned, the Dental Society is concerned that that may greatly impact access to care if dental offices stopped taking patients with certain insurance carriers. And there's hopefully a silver lining. In addition, we think that this may actually lead to some of these services being covered as opposed to non-covered. So for all these reasons, we're very supportive of this. Vermont is a little bit behind the curve in terms of what other states are doing. At last count, 40 states have adopted a version of what you have in front of you. And yes, Senator Cummings, it is sort of loosely based on an NCOIL model, but the language is also reflective of consensus language developed between the Dental Society and Delta Dental. So that's all parties are supportive. I think I'll stop there unless there's some questions of me, because I know Dr. Pittman has some comments he'd like to speak to and can certainly answer questions
Amy,
on procedure. Yep.
Just for clarification, because this was over a year ago that we took this up. Did you just say that Delta Dental has agreed with this?
Yes.
Because that's ringing a bell that said they did testify last time. And Chuck just popped up. Chuck, do you represent the? You're muted. There
Good
you go.
afternoon, committee. Chuck Storrow, Leonine Public Affairs. Yes, we do represent Delta Dental, Madam Chair, and yes, we are supportive.
Okay.
And I could.
Okay. Any questions for either Jamie or Mr. Storrow? Senator Hardy.
Just a quick question, Jamie. I thank you for your testimony. Did you submit this in writing? I was trying to absorb the stats you were giving us, and it's hard to do that. Zoom. Can you submit it if you haven't? So
I have not. Yeah, I can. These are just my chicken scratch notes for, you know.
Just
That would be
take a picture
helpful.
of it with your phone and, you know, text it to us. No,
I can polish it up for you.
but the gist is that the non-covered services are a small proportion of the overall services. And so the impact, generically speaking, would be small, but
It's, yeah,
but
it's below
it's
negligible.
meaningful to dentists. Is that a
I
brief
think,
summary?
yeah, and
Small
Dr.
but
Pittman will
meaningful?
speak to this.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more the administrative burden and the nuisance. And, you know, frankly, I was surprised, Senator, when we got these numbers from Delta, because I was expecting a greater cost shift or potential. And it may be that, obviously it'll vary based upon the practice. There may be one practice that has, you know, more in mouth guards, for example, than another, or there may be one that, you know, has more of one of these procedures that I referenced. But it's, you know, the numbers don't back that up. And so we don't, you didn't hear me say cost shift in my arguments today, because it really isn't that anymore. It's more the principle, it's more the administrative burden. And, you know, that again, it just isn't right to allow a carrier to set a price for something they don't cover.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Dr. Pittman, thank you for making time to be here.
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Steve Pittman. I practice in Colchester, Vermont. I've been in Vermont 33 years and enjoyed every year of it. Never look back. But anyway, I just like to tag on to what Jamie was saying. This is really not an economic argument for us as dentists, because it's such a small amount. Really, it's a philosophical argument about, you know, should insurance companies be able to set a fee? And by the way, what fee is set, you know, for these non-covered services? I don't think I think they have the ability to set any fee they want. So, so it's not an economic argument, but it is an administrative argument. You know, we spend a lot of our administrative time, my staff, submitting claims, following up on claims, and working with insurance claims with our patients, and that's fine. You know, we understand that goes with the business. But when you've got non-covered services, and then you're not sure what they're going to allow you to charge for a fee that they're not covering, it just adds a little more complexity to what we're doing. And that, along with the virtual credit card issue, right, where some insurance companies, this is not Delta, but other insurance companies try to encourage you to accept like a virtual credit card as payment instead of a check or an ACH payment, and they will tack on a 2 or 3% fee for that. So essentially, they're outsourcing some of their payment processes as insurance companies and placing that burden on us by charging us a 2 or 3% fee. So, you know, that's our main argument. Okay, we're not here. It's not about the money. There's no cost shift with this, and you're not going to see fees go up. You know, if you were going to see fees go up, why are 2/3 of these non-covered fees currently lower than what insurance companies would be willing to let us charge? So, I mean, if it was all about the fees, you'd see all those at least as high as what the insurance company would allow. And I think one last point, getting back to the difference between medical insurance and dental insurance, you know, medical insurance typically has a deductible, and then the rest of it's covered. There may be an 80-20 for a while, but then there's no cap for most medical insurance. Whereas dental insurance, there may be a very small deductible, but there's a limited benefit. So it may be $1,000 a year. And so we always have full transparency with our fees, with our patients. We have to have those discussions in advance, because there's going to be some patient responsibility with any of the procedures that we do. And so there's no surprise billing in dentistry. And I think, you know, because we also do not have, very huge group practices that may monopolize the market. like can happen in medicine. And so there's the marketplace tends to keep fees reasonable. And I would say, you know, to back that up, the rate of dental inflation over the last 10 years, I just got this from the Health Policy Institute at the ADA, has been averaging 2.8% from 2010 to 2020. So you're not seeing an out of control marketplace with dental fees as opposed to what has happened in the past with medical insurance. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
Senator Sirotkin.
Madam Chair. So I got a preview of all this information beforehand, and I was surprised to see how little was being charged for these non-covered services, but my reaction was different, was if it's so small, why is this an issue? And I guess what we're hearing is that it's an administrative issue. So, I hear the 7 charges, you listed those, Jamie. So take nitrous oxide, which I think frequently may not be so elective as some people may think. It may be part and parcel of a procedure in some ways. What is the exact administrative burden? If Delta Dental puts out a limit on use of nitrous oxide, why can't, I know it's probably more complicated than this, but how much more complicated is, they say the use of nitrous oxide is $500 and you're about to charge the patient $1,000. So you know you have to charge $500. What is the administrative burden there that's so great that you can't stay within those fees?
Well, to begin with, I think we charge $90 for nitrous oxide. So
I have no idea what the numbers are, obviously.
yeah, no, it's okay, but it's not a large amount. Part of it is we don't know what's going to be reimbursed or what we're going to be allowed to charge. We may know from Delta, but there's many insurance companies that we deal with. I probably have a list of 20 or 30 that we work with. And so what if that allowed fee is $25? Well, it doesn't cover my supplies, my disposables, the time to set it up. And so, it could start to intrude on the doctor-patient relationship because
that goes back to the financial argument. You're saying there's an administrative argument. I don't understand why the insurance company can't just send out a list of fees and a list of caps on those fees. I'm just trying to understand where the burden administratively is, because I think you're arguing that it's not really a burden financially, but now you're saying it might not cover your costs. So you're saying it is a burden financially. So I don't know which one is the problem.
Well, okay, so I'll tie it to the administrative burden is that we're planning this in advance. And if we don't know what the insurance company is going to allow us to charge, how can we accurately talk to the patient about fees?
So I hear you. So why can't we just tell the insurance company that they have to tell you what they're going to allow to charge?
Well, and then what if that insurance company is only going to allow us 30% of our fee?
Well, I think your Jamie had said that the total amount of loss of the total amount of these non-chargeable fees that are capped is like 1/2 of 1% of your total cost. So I'm just getting caught up. I'm getting caught up between the financial concern you have and the administrative concern. It sounds like the financial concern has been demonstrated to be very little, and I don't understand the administrative concern, because if we need to tell the insurers that they have to provide fee schedules that are fixed for a certain period of time and have to mail them out, then your bookkeeper could look at those and say, I can't charge more than this fee. I don't know.
Jamie, maybe, I was going to say, if I remember testimony, I think before, this is a marketing, you're going to pay for us, we're going to do your fillings, and oh, by the way, we're going to get you a discount on all these other services. I think that it was used as a marketing technique by the insurance company. It allowed them to market themselves.
Yeah, we've heard that argument, at least in certainly used in other jurisdictions. It's a way to sort of increase your market share potentially, in a state where there may be a little bit more competition than there is in Vermont among insurance companies, and precisely doing that, Senator. If you join our, health insurer, not only will you get these benefits, but we're going to, provide this extra benefit by setting prices for services we don't cover and make that part of our agreement with Dennis.
Okay. Dr. Pittman, did you have?
I was just
That's
going to.
Senator Brock.
Okay.
No, I've got you first, then Senator Brock. Okay.
Okay, so what I was going to say was, if nitrous oxide is pretty, is going to be a needed part of the procedure, then I would ask, why aren't the insurance companies covering it? That's where I would go, is looking at maybe asking insurance companies to cover more of these non-covered services.
Okay, Senator Brock.
I heard the argument that this may be part of the marketing of an insurance company in selling a package deal, but I've heard that applied elsewhere, not necessarily to what's happening with insurers here in Vermont. My fundamental view when I first saw this was to say, what business is it of an insurer to tell someone that they have to pay something that the insurer is not covering in the first place? This is a fundamental freedom issue. But if there is some other rationale that insurers might have, since Chuck Storrow is here representing Delta, perhaps he can tell us.
Chuck is next on the list if we are finished with our questions for Dr. Pittman. Mr. Storrow. Senator Pearson has a question first. Okay.
My question's for you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I sort of share some of Senator Sorokin's concerns about this, at least last year, but I agree with the healthcare advocate. It doesn't feel like we have a lot of choice because the group market change to health insurance is urgent. So my question to you is, do you see other paths for us to have this discussion or move the health insurance question where we would find ourselves having a more meaningful discussion about this change? I guess I would say I would feel like we would have a more meaningful discussion about this change if we weren't in an urgent position on the group market question, which I agree with Mr. Fisher, that seems to be more vital.
Yeah, right now, this is part of S88. And our choices are to concur with further suggestion of amendment. We could take this off then, and I think, or we could not concur and ask for a committee of conference. There may be one other thing in there. We could, but that, I think that's the problem. We can say, well, we'll concur with further proposal of amendment and we'll strip this out. And then we send it back to the House, which takes a day or two. Then we've got the Commerce Committee and we have the Healthcare Committee over there that had jurisdiction. I don't know how quickly they'll move it. That's what we don't know. That would be the one way to strip this out and say, okay, we will go back and look at this at another time. Or do we decide, since there's so little here, and I think I'd like to finish with Mr. Storrow before we start committee discussion. But I think, that in some ways this is a matter of principle, it was a big impact when it started out. It's become less as it's moved through time. I'm sure it was 10 years ago we did the N-Coil bill. And at that point, there were some pretty strong feelings, but can we finish with Mr. Storrow and then, okay, so Chuck, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chuck Storrow, Leonine Public Affairs for Delta Dental. As I mentioned a moment ago, even though we are the dominant dental insurer in Vermont, and even though our contracts contain these restrictions, we are actually supportive of Section 31 in the bill. And the reasons for that are, one is as Jamie has outlined, the volume of procedures that we're talking about that are subject to this restriction is very, very small. It doesn't affect people's out-of-pocket expenses related to covered services, the services that the company does reimburse dentists for. And it applies equally to all dental insurers. So in terms of, our competitive position vis-a-vis other ones, we're all in the same, it's a level playing field. And, in the final analysis, it is a philosophical question, and the company values its relationship with the dental provider community and is willing to yield on this philosophical issue.
That may inform our committee discussion. Senator Saratkin.
So Chuck is probably going to anticipate this question. What percentage of the market do you have in Vermont?
I don't know the exact figure, Senator, but I do believe, it's beyond 50%.
Okay.
It may even be much higher. I don't know specifically.
Yeah, I heard it was higher. So the obvious question is, if you feel this way, why don't you just stop the policy?
Well, the answer to that, Senator, is that if we did that, but other insurers had this policy, then they would have an advantage in marketing their plans to employers. That's usually who buys these. By saying, hey, we can deliver this additional value.
So I guess I would ask Dr. Pittman if he knows in his practice what percentage is Delta Dental and who are the other insurers? Do they also do this to you?
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. I don't have that information. There, I would, off the top of my head, I would say we're probably 50 or 60% of our insured patients are with Delta Dental. And yes, this does come into play with other insurance companies.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Storrow? All right. So that gets us back to our discussion. And let me bring the bill up. I see Jen is here. All right, let's go back.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'm in this situation where I started out thinking one thing about this and then have totally changed my mind. It doesn't seem like such a big deal given the stats that Jamie shared with us about the percentage of procedures that this covers. And I think the arguments about administrative burden and I'm not as the philosophical thing is not as big a deal for me, but we hear a lot in healthcare committee about the administrative burden on providers. And if this can ease some of that, then I think it's definitely worth it, especially for such a small amount. And especially since both parties agree, it seems fine with me. But I did want to ask you if we're sort of thinking about strategy in the big picture of this bill, there is another section that we started to discuss the other day, and that's section 33. And I didn't quite even understand what it did, the section, the interest rate thing. So I'm wondering, I see that Jill is here from DFR, if she's going to speak to that.
Yeah, Jill, and what, I'm trying to figure out what day that would get posted under. Did we take this up?
We talked about it really briefly, but
I think it was on Tuesday, if there was.
and it was, you know, we're implementing something, but then asking for a report to see if we
Yeah.
want to actually implement it. It seems kind of backwards to me.
Okay, Jill, why don't you talk to us about that?
Sorry, couldn't unmute. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Jill Rickard, Director of Policy for DFR. This is the proposal that came from AIG, and it's to implement the amendment to the adopted by the NAIC to the Model Act with respect to individual deferred annuities. And so the proposal is there is currently a 1% floor on the interest rate that's earned for cash that's surrendered. So this is when you stop paying on your policy, the money that's accumulated in that policy is owed back to you with interest. And that interest right now is between 1% and 3%. And the way it's calculated is set forth in the law, but the floor is 1%, and that's what we're talking about. The proposal is to reduce that floor to 0.15% to reflect the fact that we're in a historically low interest rate environment. And again, Chuck can speak to this because DFR doesn't take a position other than we would like some time to review what impact this would have on the market availability of policies versus any potential impact on consumers. But that is the proposal at this point. The House Commerce Committee had originally agreed to put this in their bill with the effective date being on passage, but Commissioner Pichek later testified that we would prefer to have a little bit more time to look at it before it's implemented, before it's effective. And so that's why they just pushed out the effective date and required a study from us before it goes in effective. I'm not sure why they did it that way, but that's the reason. Is that helpful?
It is a strange construction, but basically this was an NAI. I've got an annuity. I pay it in, and at some point I can start drawing it out. I set up this annuity when I was 25. I'm now 35. I'm out of a job and I stopped paying. So I am entitled to get the money I paid in plus interest. And this is over the interest I'm entitled to get back, correct?
That's right.
Because the annuity, once I stop, it stops accruing, right? Or does it stop? It stops accruing. I stop paying in, so it's just sitting there.
That's right.
So I can get it back plus interest. And this is over the interest rate. NAIC, but I think it said not unanimously, voted to lower that interest rate because the market has been lower. Was there something that said they could actually, with the low market rates, and annuities are generally in more conservative funds, with the low market rates, they could end up paying out more.
That's right.
Than they're making on their money. So they've asked to lower it. The House lowered it. But then at some point, DFR said, well, we'd kind of like to look at this a little more. So at some point, I've heard floor amendments. They said, okay, we will push out the date signaling what we intend to do, but give you a year to take a look at it. And if you have any strong feelings, or if the market does something really weird, that you could go back and change it, or we could go back and change. Is that what's going on?
That's right.
Okay, and are you okay with that?
Yeah, that it was our request to push it out, to give us some time to
Okay.
take. So
But in general, are you okay with the NAI? I mean, normally NAIC, and I never knew it had to be unanimous, sets a model law, and we generally go along with it.
It doesn't have to be unanimous. Certain committees, so this was the Life Insurance Committee, vote on adoption of amendments, which don't need to be adopted by states. We don't necessarily adopt all
Right.
of the NAIC models or the amendments that are offered to states. So this is one where there may be an impact to consumers, and if it's the case that insurance companies decide that they don't want to offer these products anymore, because if there is a cash surrender provision and they end up having to pay out an interest rate which is higher than the return they're making from their bond investments, then they may decide not to offer these products. That may be the case. Some others have expressed concern that consumers would be impacted by a lowered interest rate, although this would only apply to policies that are new going forward. So we'd like to take a look, because we haven't had a lot of time to spend with the provision.
Mr. Storrow,
Madam
you're
Chair.
in the hot seat today.
I am. You know, I was thinking because I represent 4 insurance companies and 3 of them have an interest in this bill. If you put in life insurance, I'd have a grand slam. But anyways, I also represent AIG, and a couple of points that I want to make. One is that this only relates to the context of surrendering an annuity. It doesn't change or affect the issue or the scenario where somebody's paid up their annuity, they've paid it fully, and they're entitled to a lifetime stream of income. This has no bearing on that. It wouldn't affect that lifetime stream of income. It's basically if you're cashing it in before you paid it up. And as Ms. Rickards indicated, this would only apply to new annuities, existing annuity contracts that are in place that would require us to pay an accumulated interest of at least 1% would not be changed, because those are contracts, and the legislature can't change a contract after it's been entered into. And it is true that the scenario of low interest rates is creating pressure. I mean, basically what happens when somebody buys an annuity, you know, the money that they pay to the life insurer is put into a pool. It isn't, you know, tied specifically to your annuity. It goes into a pool of money that all the people who are paying for annuities pay for. And if interest rates are so low, you know, when those policies are surrendered and we have to pay out with an interest component that's higher than the prevailing rates, you know, it does create a problem in terms of being able to continue to offer the annuities. And, you know, they're one, you know, tool in the retirement toolbox amongst many that would be a shame to see that go away. And so therefore, and the other thing I just want to mention, I think it was last Sunday night on 60 Minutes, it was either that or the previous Sunday, Chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank was being interviewed, Jerome Powell, and he was asked, are you going to change interest rates anytime in the near future? And he said, absolutely not. Basically, you know, that would croak the economy. You know, the economy is fragile, so the Fed's keeping interest rates very low to help relieve the economic pressure. And so we're in this low interest rate environment, and, you know, with the way this all works, it does create a problem in terms of the viability of being able to offer annuities going forward. So we feel it's an appropriate measure to take. It was adopted with only a few dissenting votes by the NAIC, and we're fine with the July 1, 2022 effective date, even though, you know, it is subject to and therefore sort of contingent on the department's report, which would probably drive, if they were against it, legislative action next year. It helps us prepare for the future to know that at least, you know, again, subject to that DFR review and possible legislative action, that the rate has been dropped in Vermont and we can plan accordingly in terms of developing the products.
Senator Hardy, does that answer your question?
Sorry, I had to unmute. It does. I'm understanding it more. So annuities, would this only apply if you are cashing in an annuity early?
It only applies if you're cashing in an annuity early, and it only applies to an annuity that you bought after the effective date of the legislation.
Okay, and would it apply to all the different types of annuities? I will be honest, I'm looking up definitions of annuities to make sure I understand it all correctly. But there's a whole bunch of there's several different kinds: fixed, variable, immediate, and deferred income annuities. Does it apply to all of those?
Well, you know, to be honest with you, Senator, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
And these were only for ones moving forward. So we don't know how many people this might impact. It's just for people who might take out annuities or after
a year from July.
So any current annuities would not be impacted. Is that right?
That's absolutely right, because that's a contract between the life insurance and the person who bought it. And, you know, that's a contract we have to pay.
And if somebody has an annuity and dies, I see, Jill, I see you want to help answer some of these questions. But if somebody has an annuity and dies, they get the payment at that point, or their estate, right? Or their beneficiary gets the annuity payment. And is that correct? And would they get the interest rate at that point?
If the person who dies has already paid for the annuity and the income stream is being generated, there would be no impact on this. Doesn't affect the income stream from a paid up annuity. If somebody is in the process of paying for their annuity and then they die, then yes, there would be a surrender value of the money that was paid in plus the interest component.
So death means that it's an early surrender or early. Right. Yeah. Okay. All right, Jill, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to answer, thank you. Your first question about which types of annuities this applies to, it is only individual deferred fixed annuities. So that is not index annuities or annuities sort of tied more to the market. This is the safest of the safe. The question about how many people this would impact is something that we also have questions about. It's not a ton of people because it's not a product that a lot of people tend to invest in unless they're risk averse in their investment, retirement investment plans. But that's one thing that we do want to look into to see how many people would be impacted if this affected market availability of these products.
And you feel comfortable, Jill, even though it's kind of a kooky order of things in here, you would feel comfortable coming back to us and saying, hey, wait, we don't think this should happen because it impacts too many Vermonters or it's a negative impact. You wouldn't shy away from, you being DFR would not shy away from telling us that, right? In your report?
No, absolutely not. I mean, that's the reason we want to take a look. And if we do think it's going to have an impact on Vermonters one way or the other, that's why we want to share that information with you in January while you have a chance to make a decision on this bill. Or the law as it.
Yeah. I just, as I said the other day, I don't like the sort of position of having put something into effect and then the possibility of us reversing it once we get more information. It feels wrong to me. However, I'm really sensitive to the other stuff that's in this bill and the timeline for it. So just trying to get a comfort level.
If I can add one more thing, I do think it might have a slight benefit to the companies offering these products so that if they foresee that this might happen in July because it's in law unless you change it, then they can prepare their forms and their policies to comply with the new provisions. So it may be beneficial for that reason.
Yeah, I just don't want to be in the position where they say, well, we have all of our forms done. We've heard that before, haven't we, committee? And we can't change our forms now. So I just would ask the companies to not do their forms until we've heard the report in January.
They probably won't. Okay. Senator Bray.
I have just a quick question. So I understand that we're in these historic low interest rate periods, but the investment market is so strong. So I'm wondering why the floor has to be depressed further when it seems as though there's an awful lot of upside available to professional investors, those managing the pool.
A couple of responses to that, Senator. One is that by their very nature, annuities require investing in very safe, stable financial instruments, because basically what's happening, there is an insurance proposition that goes on in here. You get a payment of income for your life. And so that could be, you know, depending on how long somebody lives, it could be a little or a long time. So the companies have to be very careful to make sure that there's funds available. And, you know, sure, the equity markets are high at now, but they're much more volatile. And so there's, you know, basically in order to guarantee a lifetime income, the investments have to be invested mainly in U.S. Treasury bonds.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, it seems as though, I mean, the alternative is just alter your pricing for the product, right? Wouldn't that be another way to cover it? Larger premiums to gain the same benefit is, but
yeah, but that may you know that you know there's a balance to be struck there. And the other thing that I do want to mention is that this is a floor on the interest component of the payout for if an annuity is surrendered. If a company wants to agree in its contract with the person who purchased it to pay more than 0.15%, there's nothing in this change that would prevent them from doing that. And then a final point would be, because this would only apply to new contracts, people will go into buying those contracts. They should go into buying those contracts with their eyes open and knowing that, you know, there is this floor. It's an optional thing to buy one.
sure, of course. Okay, well, thanks. It's always worrisome to see a rate of return that's less than inflation.
And that's why annuities are not necessarily a good investment for many people. But if you want to, you know, have certainty that you're going to get a stream of, you know, payments over your lifetime, you know, even if the return isn't that high, you know, an annuity is good for that purpose, as opposed to taking your chances with the stock market.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Sorokin.
So I just want to comment on this issue and then go back to dental for a second. So I share the concern that Senator Hardy has, but having been around the block for a long time, I think this is just wrong. We should not be passing legislation when we have a study forthcoming. And I don't know how it happened in the House or why it happened in the House, but it's always so much harder to pass legislation once it's in place, and that includes a repeal, than it is to look at it anew and having to pass something if this study comes back and says it's not a good idea. I don't see the harm at all in just taking this language out and wait for the study. And then if they can make their case then that's the time to pass the legislation. It's just counterintuitive. And I also find it somewhat difficult to say that because we have 21 days left to pass the rate review that we can't, with rule suspensions, take a shot at something that we feel might be on the merits, the right thing to do, because we have a gun to our heads of the timing of this. I've always been a concern, and we have experience with this as well, where the Green Mountain Care Board and the insurers and Medicaid, everybody says, we have to start filing these rates 8 months before they go into effect. And we challenged them in the past, and lo and behold, they were able to do the rates even though we made a statutory change in June. So there are ways to deal with this and still deal with this on the merits. And I agree with Mike Fisher that the scope of the problem has gone down, I guess, because of the numbers, but insurance companies are there to protect consumers' rates in some ways. And I am concerned, I still remain concerned, that if there is a procedure like nitrous oxide, to use as an example, that the insurance companies are trying very hard to keep the rate down on extractions, and it simply can be done an end run on that by saying, okay, we only can charge this much for extraction, but we'll charge much more for the nitrous oxide. So as a package, you can't keep the rates down on behalf of the consumers. And I wish there was an alternative way, because I agree philosophically that they shouldn't be capping rates of things they don't cover. But I've asked the department, why can't we just, if there's an unreasonable limit on the non-covered service, why can't a dentist or a dental society bring that to the attention of the department and say that's an unfair business practice, and take a look at those rates and do something like that? And the final thing I want to say is, and I like Jill to answer that if she could, and the final thing I want to say is, Jamie said that 40 states have passed versions of this. And I would like to know if there's any versions of this that are more favorable to consumers than the one that is being presented here. I'd ask Jill first, is there any way we can get some control over what is being suggested as arbitrarily low rates by the insurance companies on these non-covered services?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Sorokin. I think that's tough because DFR generally doesn't have jurisdiction over contractual matters between providers and insurers, or the rates for non-covered services. I mean, our jurisdiction is over the covered services. So it is something that we talked about this morning, exploring if there's anything that we would suggest to sort of put some barriers around that. It might be an issue of requiring some transparency of the rates that might be charged for non-covered services to consumers before the services are performed. But again, it seems a little bit outside of our jurisdiction at this point, but we are open to further exploring your suggestion.
I think you said that your jurisdiction lies in monitoring contracts between insurance companies and providers. Isn't this provision part of the contract?
No, that is outside of our jurisdiction.
This is the contract between the company and the provider, not the consumer. They do the contract with the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, just like sort of the medical offices set their rates. We don't have any say over that unless it's a matter of a covered service.
Okay. And then the last question I have for Jamie was, what do you see? I mean, we could ask our legislative counsel to look at this, but what do you see as various versions of this? You said 40 versions, and I'm wondering if there's any kind of different versions that could solve your problem and also at least my concern.
Thanks for the question, Senator. I'm looking at a document that the American Dental Association provided that is, has a list of all the states, and I'm happy to share this with the committee. It may not get to they're all sort of patterned on this model where you define a covered service, and then, the operative language is that's basically where you're limited. You can't get into non-covered areas. So it's the definitions of covered service and then the restricting clause that is the common element in each state, each of the 40 states.
So they basically say you cannot dictate the cost of a service you do not cover. Is that
Correct.
the common factor? That was
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Can you send
Committee.
that to us, Jamie?
I'm sorry?
You send that along to us?
Yep, I sure can. And I provided to Faith the statistics in chicken scratch form.
That is probably being posted as we speak. Committee. If these were independent bills, we would have time to do things. They are not. This is, for any of you who haven't been through it before, end game. And yes, this is not uncommon technique. It's like playing poker. We have something we really want on the table. I don't think we're all really committed to the insurance housekeeping bill as, something that's dire. But I think this committee has said it really wants that separate market separation, because that's going to have immediate ability for people to afford their health insurance. We're not so sure about dental, or we wish we could wade into it longer. But the bottom line is the Dental Society and the dental company are agreed this is fine to do. When it was a major marketing thing, it worked for them. Now it isn't. And they've got their market share. And so they're not fighting it. We have the annuities question. That goes to the Commerce Committee, who may or may not care about the health insurance markets. Either way, it is going to probably take us a week of our 2 weeks to get a bill to the House, even if they concur, and get it back to us. If they don't concur, which is probably is likely, then we are really cutting it close. And so it's really I happen to come down on the side of, I think, allowing insurance companies, because they're big and they have a big market share, to dictate the price of services they don't cover is setting a precedent which I'm not comfortable setting. We have one health insurance company that has a huge market share here. And if they don't cover my knee replacement, I don't want them telling my doctor, this is what you can charge for a knee replacement. To me, that is not a desirable business practice. And so I don't know. I mean, this is rolling the dice. How much do we want that insurance market, and how much are we willing to risk that we could lose it in the end? We do have an S bill in play. It could make it all the the way through, which that was S-125. That was our separation of the market bill. I don't know if that can make it through the other body and back in time either. So that's my 2 cents. The floor is yours. Committee. I got all of you. Senator Hardy, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I hear you on the timing issue. I do think the House probably wants the separation of the markets thing. They know that we want it, but I imagine that they also want it, given the savings to consumers. My biggest concern in this bill is the language on the annuities going into effect, going into law before we get the report back. I just don't want to put ourselves in this situation where we're told we already did the forms, this is too late for us to change this. We've heard that before. It's uncomfortable and not a good way to make public policy. So that's the one sentence that I would like to get out of this bill and figure out a way to do that. I am okay with the dental insurance thing, part of the bill.
Okay. Senator Pearson. You lit up? Okay, we've got dental and we've got annuities. So I've got one for, all right.
Well, Madam Chair,
Ready?
since you called on me, I just point out that S-135 is in committee on the House side, so it got out of their rules, I guess. So I don't know that it's a great option, but we could ask them to just concur. They have de facto concurred by putting the exact same language in here.
Well, they can't concur. They have to get it through the floor.
Right, but they just got it through the floor in this amendment.
Yeah. Okay. So you want us to ask?
Well, I'm not recommending that. I'm just pointing out that it doesn't.
Yeah, we could do that.
I was surprised to find it wasn't in House rules, I guess is the fair way to say it.
Okay. We still have 360 ahead of us, guys. We could take testimony on the annuity. Well, no, because that's a study. We could also be risking that the companies will stop offering annuities until the decision's made, if they're in fact losing money on them. So there's risks either way. Senator Bray, any thoughts?
I think I'm supportive of what we have, other than there is I think it's maybe, this would be like the third time where, along the lines of what Senator Hardy was saying, we end up perhaps okaying something and then being told that the process has gone along far enough. I've seen this elsewhere with billing questions related to utilities, and I'd rather not see us sort of make a backhanded commitment to something prior to having the report. That's my only concern.
Okay. I'm going down. Senator Sirotkin.
I think I've said all I'm going to say.
All right, you don't like the dental. How about the annuities?
I don't like the annuity. I don't like the annuities on the process.
All right.
I don't like the dental on the process question either.
Okay. Who haven't I gotten to? Senator Brock? No, you're muted, Randy.
I like the dental exclusion. I'm I'm neutral. I can go either way on the other.
Okay. Senator McDonald. Who am I missing? Oh, Pearson didn't vote.
I'm having trouble putting together an informed opinion.
That's a cop-out, Senator. Who said any of the other opinions were informed?
Forgive me, Madam Chair, I'm copying out.
Okay, Senator Pearson.
I don't have strong feelings, to be frank.
So I got two cop-outs.
Perhaps
And one
if you
has to
lead, we
be
will
different.
follow.
Right. We're supposed to call those swing votes.
Yeah, swing votes, but we've either got to go back and I'll call. Well, this is interesting because I've got to call the chairman of the Commerce Committee to tell him we want the health insurance, but we don't want his amendment.
I believe it's in House Healthcare.
It
So
is
we
in
might be-
health, but the insurance amendment went on in House Commerce.
Right. So you can just talk to Lippert about the shoddy work of House Commerce.
To be clear, Madam Chair, the separation of the markets amendment was a floor amendment from members of House Healthcare.
Okay, so it never went to House Healthcare, so it's not sitting in House Healthcare?
So S-135 is sitting at the separating the individual and small group health insurance markets bill is sitting
That's-
in House Healthcare. That's the
that's in
language that they
healthcare.
added, right? And the Healthcare Committee members added that on the floor as an amendment. They
Alright.
didn't have possession of the bill, but the members
Okay.
entered.
Is House Healthcare as bogged down as Senate Healthcare at this moment?
I would cautiously say no.
Okay. All right, let me,
Well, let me ask this, and maybe member of the committee can perhaps inform me better than I'm informed on this. If we took the amendment that is in front of us right now and passed it, what harm would be done?
Senator Hardy.
I think Senator Brock, it's not so much harm isn't the right word. It's more just, for me, because the only thing I'm objecting to right now is the annuities thing. I'm fine with the dental insurance thing. Is just that sort of putting us in this awkward position of having to make a decision on something that we've already passed into law after the fact. It just seems backwards. And it seems to me if they thought it through a little bit more, they would have done the study and not put in the other thing. So it just doesn't seem like good public policy making to me. And that's
procedurally, it may be, unusual, it may be awkward, and maybe something that we don't want to do, but if we go ahead and pass it, are we really doing any harm?
I mean, we still have the option of repealing it next year. You're absolutely right. It just puts this committee in a position where we were in this year, where we have to, we're going to get the AIG and the other companies or whomever it is coming in here and saying, we've already done our forms, we've already done them, blah, blah, blah. So that's where
I
Both
think,
forms this time and assume that we'll change it. Do
Yeah.
them once and they'll have one printing.
I think, Jill, doesn't DFR, I assume Jill's there, yep. Does DFR have to approve forms? I know you have to approve some forms. You muted, Jill.
Sorry. I'm not sure the answer to that as to whether we review annuity forms. I have to check and get back to you if that's okay.
Okay. Chuck, could we just do this with an instruction that forms were not to be printed until such time as DFR has put the stamp of approval on this? And now we've pretty much told them, if you run out and get your forms printed now, we're going to be under pressure to back down.
You can give me that instruction. And in fact, I'll go out on a limb. And as far as me, Chuck Storrow goes, if DFR says, no way, Jose, I'm not going to be back in front of you saying, oh, disregard that because we've done our forms. I mean, we'll do those forms at our risk.
Okay. And Jill,
And-
from
and
what I
understand
understand, this went through and then DFR said, well, you know, maybe we ought to look at, was it the market impact of the availability?
Right,
And
any potential impact on consumers as well.
yeah, so this wasn't the House set it up. This was, they had voted the bill out. And then you came back and said, well, we want some more time. So this was the solution. It gave you some more time, but initially you didn't have a problem with this.
Yeah, that's right. That it was unfortunate timing, and we'll take the blame for that.
Okay. Senator Bray.
This might be a question for Mr. Storrow. I think if we were to fail to approve at this point, what is the harm to the insurers? Will they withdraw these products, or what's the consequence if it took an extra 9 to 12 months for an approval to come through because we waited for a study to be completed?
Senator Bray, I can't say that we would immediately withdraw these products. It's a matter of just sort of increasing pressure that's making the situation untenable. Another 9 months, I can't say that would mean the end of the world. But it is a situation that's, it's dire. And, it's something that's building over time. It's a pressure building over time kind of phenomena. And so I'm confident because the interest rates are going to remain low, that DFR is going to say, this is okay. Or alternatively, that they're going to say, well, maybe not quite that low, but certainly below 1%. So, I recognize the procedural sort of awkwardness of this. This was a situation where we approached DFR with the proposal and they said, we don't really want you to seek an amendment in the House because we don't want you to encumber our bill. We respected that. But then the House decided to make changes otherwise, and DFR graciously said, well, we won't oppose you. We sort of lift our request that you not seek an amendment. So, we went in and I went in into the House Commerce and asked for it, and they gave it. And then the floor amendment came up later.
Okay, thanks.
Initiate the discussion in House Commerce.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, what?
You didn't initiate the discussion in House Commerce?
No, I did initiate it after DFR said, that basically gave us permission to seek that without their backing, but not with also absent their opposition. Just said, sure, go ahead, take your chances. And so I did.
Madam, may I follow up? So my conclusion is that when we bring a bill to our colleagues, that we're saying we're confident in the recommendation we're making. And I feel like by virtue of having a pending report that could reverse our decision, we're not as confident as we ordinarily would be. And so, just sort of the prudent and conservative side of me says, if there's not a demonstrable harm in waiting, then I would be inclined to wait and then act once we had better information.
All right, why don't we leave it at this? I will call or email, I believe it is Representative Marcotte, and see what he thinks the reaction might be if we sent this bill back, because this is a committee of conference situation. This is not a bill. If we send it back and the proposal of amendment that we strip out the annuities. Just, and we'll, then we can come back and decide what we want to do. Does that work for the committee? I know it doesn't for Senator Sirotkin, Senator Hardy.
I think just stripping out the language about it going into effect, but keeping the report. I'm totally fine with the report and would be maybe fine with the other thing after we get the report.
Okay,
And
so
if they're willing to
you would,
concur, if they're willing to concur with just taking out section 33, but leaving in 33A, then the bill's good.
okay. Want to keep the study, but not, all right. Then everybody think about what you're going to do if they say no. Senator Pearson,
The only urgent matter here is the healthcare marketplace question, correct?
well, I think DFR might think that their housekeeping bill has some urgency.
Well, urgency in the session, but not, what I guess I'm trying to understand is if we didn't have that healthcare insurance question in this bill, we would just treat it like any other bill. We'd toss back a further amendment or ask for
Yeah.
confirmation. But it's this healthcare thing that is creating the urgency, right?
Right. If that gets bogged down, people are in trouble.
So
I
think,
will also
you know,
ask Representative Lippert
that's my
to
point.
keep that bill in play.
Because that might change our process crunch here.
Okay. All right, I think we're supposed to go on and talk about 360. But it is after 3. Some of us have a 5 o'clock meeting. And I haven't gotten out of this chair since 8:45 this morning. And I need some time to write these emails or make these phone calls. So I think we're going to call it quits today. At the rate it's looking, though, we could be looking at some into the evening sessions. We do seem to be making some progress on 360. I've got Steve Klein coming in next week because I need to know how much money is needed to balance the budget. And I'm getting the impression that the revenue fees, the surcharge on the transfer tax is being figured in. They need the money to cover the phasing in or out. The Clean Water Fund, the percent of the rooms and meals tax that several years ago we dedicated to the Clean Water Fund is being, I guess in the governor's proposal, is being put back into the general fund, and they're covering the water fund for 3 years with ARPA money. But there's some shortfall there, I think, because we're trying to save some money for workforce training for the state colleges and for pensions. So we're trying to keep some general fund money available there. So I'm trying to figure out the other thing that we took some testimony on the PPP grants, and we haven't talked about that, but there are 2 or 3 other proposals that are in the federal tax code that have to do with the earned income tax credit. The feds extended, I believe, the benefits and the eligibility. And I believe the number I have is 7 million for one and 5 million for the other. That's something for people, which may be a balance if you don't consider businesses people. But that's also a lot of money, and that would be an ongoing hit. The PPP will only hit next year. It's a one-time hit. The EITC, right now it looks like it will be an annual hit. So I'm trying to get some sense, and things are moving, as we speak, in approps as to what's needed over there, which is why miscellaneous tax is usually the last or next to the last bill to go. Senator Bray.
I know this is sort of a live topic in approach as well, but I did want to just flag the concern while you mentioned the Clean Water Fund in passing. And it took us years to finally dedicate rooms and meals money to that. I think 3 years running, I had to propose a per parcel fee and spend my.
One of my more painful memories is trying
Yes.
to come up.
Yes, well, so it's like, I was at the skunk at the garden party 3 years running. Finally, we came up with rooms and meals. We committed to it. I think we're only 2 years into it, and now we're waiving it for 5. So I know it's only being waived through a notwithstanding, but it's a little worrisome to me that we would, our durable funding stream has turned out to only last 2 years. So the other thing, there is some timing issues. So if it's waived for 5 years, that's $60 million, and then they're proposing to backfill with 100 million. So it's like, give us 60 and you'll get 100. Sounds like too good to be true, maybe. But the ARPA money all has to be allocated, as I understand it, in 3.5. So 3.5 and 5 don't align. So there's a timeline issue.
Senator,
ARPA
you're
dollars
out
are
of
more
our
constrained.
jurisdiction.
Well, I'm just saying I don't know if we're going to have the chance to sort of argue for tax stability, or if that's been made on a.
Well, I think, first I have no idea, but what goes in to the general fund really, I just need to know how much money they need.
Right.
If we can find another way to come up with that money, I think the reason they're doing it is because they need the general fund to cover these other things that ARPA can't be used for, like pensions and the state colleges are the two big ones. I know that we're not funded in the governor's budget. And so they're trying to free up some general fund. I just need to know, we've got all these little things coming in. Personally, I don't like, hitting up the property transfer tax, but mostly on businesses at a time when businesses are struggling. I'm not overly sympathetic to $1 million home buyers, but
I'm not disagreeing, and I know that we're.
Yeah, I just what I'm trying to find out now is, what are they looking at in the budget? How much do they need to cook that pie? And and that comes from Susan Bartlett's. I bake it and she cuts it up and shares it, but usually she told me how big the pie had to be. So we're going to take a look at that next week. It may color some of our final decisions. But there is something other than PPP at play in these tax link ups. So we need to know that. And then I think that's it. I'm going to go see if I can reach our respective members. And Faith, if you can get me some phone numbers, because I don't think I might have Representative Lippert's, if you can just text those to me.
And
I
don't have, let me take you